Lacey here with the Sweet Pea Chef, and I have a brand new meal prep recipe for you today. We are going to be making spaghetti squash noodles and turkey meatballs, and it's so yummy and satisfying and the perfect low carb twist. So if you're a spaghetti meatballs lover, I think you're going to love this. Let's get started. So first we need to get our spaghetti squash roasting because that's going to take the longest. So go ahead and start preheating your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit and then lining a rimmed baking sheet with some aluminum foil. I find that a medium large spaghetti squash will yield about 2 to 3 cups of cooked spaghetti squash noodles. So kind of factor that in when you're making your meal prep. I'm using 2 to 3 for this entire week's meal prep. I also like to find spaghetti squash that are very evenly sized. That way they're gonna bake evenly and everything will be done at the same time. We're gonna carefully slice the spaghetti squash using a large, sharp knife, and we're gonna cut through the stem. Then we're gonna remove all of the seeds out of the spaghetti squash, and then we can discard those. Transfer your cut spaghetti squash halves over to our prepared rimmed baking sheet. Then with our spaghetti squash halves cut side up, we're gonna lightly drizzle a little bit of olive oil, followed by a sprinkle of sea salt, and then a little bit of ground black pepper evenly over the spaghetti squash halves. Then we're gonna flip the spaghetti squash halves over so that they are cut side down. This is gonna help the spaghetti squash kind of steam as it bakes, which is gonna help it get done faster, and it's just a really easy way to make spaghetti squash noodles. Now let's transfer our spaghetti squash into the oven. We're gonna bake for about 45 minutes to an hour. So while the squash is in the oven, we can go ahead and get our meatballs ready to go. So to prep our meatballs, we're gonna go ahead and line a rimmed baking sheet with some parchment paper and then set that aside. In a large mixing bowl, we're gonna combine some lean ground turkey, followed by some almond meal, chopped Italian parsley, grated parmesan, sea salt, ground black pepper, garlic powder, and some eggs. And then we're gonna mix this together very well. You can use a spoon or your hands, whatever you like to mix it together, but make sure everything is fully combined. Next, either using a 2 tablespoon scoop or your hands, go ahead and form the meatball mixture into meatballs. We're gonna get them nice and evenly sized, and then we're gonna transfer those over to our prepared baking sheet. Make sure to leave a little bit of space in between the meatballs so that they cook evenly. The spaghetti squash is ready to go when it is easily pierced with a fork, and you'll notice that the top might become a little bit golden brown from the oven. That's totally okay. We're gonna discard the skin anyway, so don't worry about that. Once the spaghetti squash is tender, we can go ahead and remove it from the oven, and then once they're cool enough to touch, go ahead and flip them over to allow them to cool fully. Once our spaghetti squash is out of the oven and we have the oven free, go ahead and transfer our meatballs back into the oven, and we're gonna cook them for about 15 to 20 minutes, also at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. What we want is for the turkey meatballs to become fully cooked through. If you have a digital thermometer, I highly recommend using it. You're gonna want it to get to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it gets to that temperature, go ahead and remove the meatballs from the oven and then allow them to cool. When the spaghetti squash is cool to the touch, go ahead and use a fork. We're going to carefully scrape the inside of the spaghetti squash out into noodles. You're not gonna believe how easy this is. It's so simple. You just basically scrape all of the insides, and then you can discard the peel or the skin and then keep all those tasty noodles for later. Meanwhile, we can go ahead and start our quick marinara sauce. This is so easy to make and really tasty. I think you're gonna like it. So in a saucepan over medium-high heat, we're gonna heat some olive oil until it's nice and hot. Then we're gonna add in some minced garlic, and we're gonna cook this for about a minute until it's fragrant. We're gonna stir this pretty consistently. Make sure your garlic doesn't burn at this point. Then add in some tomato paste, some crushed tomatoes, sea salt, and some ground black pepper, and then we're gonna stir to combine. Cover this and let it cook for about 10 minutes at a simmer, during which time it'll start to thicken and become really robust and be so flavorful. Then remove it from the heat, toss in some fresh basil and stir that together, and then our sauce is ready to go. To get our spaghetti squash noodles and turkey meatballs all ready to meal prep, I love using my glass meal prep containers. They're so awesome. They're really easy to portion out your meals. They're microwave safe, oven safe, and dishwasher safe. So it's really awesome, and I love them so much. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay out our meal prep containers for this meal. And then on our first side of our meal prep container, I'm gonna add in our spaghetti squash noodles. For this meal prep, I'm going to be adding in 1 cup of the spaghetti squash noodles, which will equal out about 42 to 45 calories for that entire amount. This is awesome when you compare it to regular spaghetti noodles, which are 220 calories for the same amount, plus they have a bunch of refined ingredients in them. So the spaghetti squash noodles are a big win on this. Plus they're paleo and gluten-free and clean eating, so really awesome. On the opposite end of our meal prep containers, I'm gonna add in a little bit of our marinara sauce. This is gonna make it so that when we heat everything up later, we're gonna have our meatballs already sitting in some of the sauce, which is gonna make it really tasty and have a nice even flavor. So go ahead and add a little base layer of marinara sauce, followed by about 4 to 5 turkey meatballs, whichever you prefer. If you're looking to cut your calories, you might want to leave one of those out. If not, you can add 1 or 2 more in. It's really up to you and your calorie goals. And then, of course, we're going to add in another layer of our tasty, quick marinara sauce to bring the whole thing together. For our finishing touches, I like to add a little bit of grated parmesan cheese to the top of my spaghetti squash noodles, and I like to add some fresh sliced basil over the top of the meatballs. Then we just put the lid on these babies and we can transfer them to the fridge. They're gonna last for a good 4 to 5 days in a good airtight container. When you're ready to enjoy them, just grab them out of the fridge, remove the lid, and microwave for about 2 to 3 minutes until everything is cooked through. And you're gonna have delicious spaghetti squash and turkey meatballs ready to go. So next time you're craving a big bowl of pasta, remember you can meal prep spaghetti squash noodles and turkey meatballs for a healthy, low carb, and delicious alternative to spaghetti. And it's just so good and so easy to make. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you love this meal prep recipe video. And if you want more meal prep ideas, check out my How to Meal Prep playlist with all sorts of great ideas. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.